Hi, hello, my name's Ollie and this is my channel Book Drawer. For those who don't know, I enjoy reviewing queer fiction and occasionally I make little images out of it. I am going to talk about my experience when I went down to Tate Britain. So Tate Britain at the moment, I've got an exhibition on which is just about to close. There's about a week left, but I haven't had a chance to see it. I was down in London, got to have a look at queer British art, which is between the period of 1861 and 1967. And that is because it's kind of the lead up before there was the partial decriminalisation of homosexuality act, and the exhibition basically encapsulates a lot of very kind of radical, really, queer LGBT folk who were very influential at the time in terms of the various different artistic achievements which they contributed, whilst it was still illegal to be gay. I mean, the thing in England, lesbianism didn't exist because Queen Victoria just didn't acknowledge that was like a thing, so they were able to just like covertly carry on, whereas it was illegal for guys to get it on, basically. In this exhibition there was heaps of just really awesome visual recognition for all those characters who are quite defiant and just like, this is who I am, take notice of me, but had that influence and impact on our LGBT community. I was basically there just enjoying walking around, soaking up all these different like heroes and heroines, and decided to do some sketches of the exhibition, of some of the writers that were featured in this exhibition. So this is me just concentrating on those particular writers of that time who were acknowledged in the exhibition. I basically ended up spending an entire afternoon. I was one of the last people to leave. I was pretty much like kicked out. It was like, yeah, we're done now, you need to leave. Because I was just enjoying having a good old draw. I haven't drawn like that for ages, and it was just really nice to actually look at paintings and respond to them live, sketching out my initial reaction to them. Haven't done that since like college, so I think I'm going to try and do that more actively, because it was just a really nice relaxing thing to do. Anyway, this is Sackville Beaton. She was a writer, and she achieved a literary success with Lolly Willows in 1926. She met someone called Valentine Auckland in 1906 to 1969. In one of her novels, she actually included a lesbian relationship in her novel in 1936, which was called Summer Will Show. This is from the actual image in the exhibition which I took. I like how kind of subtle and composed she is as well, though she's got these quirky features in terms of having her circular glasses and her cropped hair, and just the little kind of delicate touches of her necklace and ring to just give her this kind of effortless class. I think that's pretty cool. The person who took the picture was Sylvia Townsend Warner, and it was taken in 1930. The next sketch that I did was of this lovely, handsome police officer dude called PC Harry Daly. And there's a painting which isn't actually included in the book, so I can't show you, but I'll try and add a picture on the side. It was painted by Duncan Grant, so this PC, he's actually written a small little memoir called The Small Cloud in 1986, and it made me actually really want to read it when I was doing a bit of background research on him, because he actually had a relationship with E.M. Forster, who wrote Maurice. So I was kind of like, ooh, this is kind of interesting. Who are you? Because PC Harry Daly seemed to be a part of this kind of underground scene, and he knew Duncan Grant. And Duncan Grant, who painted this painting, which I'll try and show, seemed to have lots of other kind of relationships with contemporary male figures, such as John Maynard Keynes. For people who don't know, it probably doesn't mean anything, but this was like mind-blowing for me. John Maynard Keynes set up what is basically now the Arts Council. He was an economist, because that's where I actually work during the day. He has enabled so many artists to thrive in the UK. He was the kind of visionary behind that. So for me to find out that John Maynard Keynes had relationships with men was just like overwhelming. But Duncan Grant also had a relationship with someone else called Lytton Strachey, and there was a painting of him as well, which was done in 1916 by Doria Carrington. But I didn't actually end up doing a sketch on this because I didn't find out that until afterwards. But also, when I saw this painting, I was terrified by his hands. I don't know if you can see this, but he's got these really overly long fingers as he's holding this book, and it just made me think of X-Files. I don't know if you remember the episode Squeeze with Eugene in it, but Eugene basically would crawl up your drain pipes and then rip out your liver. And I was tiny when I watched that, but so when I saw this image, I was just like, I can't stare at that. I can't stare at that and draw it out. The next one I drew was Vernon Lee, and I did this in a bit more of a fluid way. I tried to spend less time on it, and it's because in the original image it's much more impressionistic, it's much more flowing, so I just tried to be a bit more loose and playful with it. So Vernon Lee was actually born Violet Paget, but chose that name because it was advantageous, leaving it undecided whether the writer was male or female. Which I thought was pretty cool of its time, because this painting was actually done in 1881. Vernon Lee actually wrote a whole raft of stories and essays and stuff, but the two which stood out for me was Haunting's Fantastic Stories, which was a series of ghost stories, so I want to kind of check that out and see what type of ghost stories were of its time. Miss Brown in 1884, which was a more satirical and witty look at gender roles and gender conformity, and how a female is kind of controlled and constrained even if she has her own financial independence. So for me, I want to explore that book in particular because I think it's quite interesting to see how social structure basically controlled and suppressed women of that time. Vernon Lee also wrote Althea's Dialogues on Aspirations and Duties in 1894, and this had a more revealing but subtle look into the erotics of female friendships. So I think Vernon Lee is a pretty cool customer, really. The fact that she was quite defiant in the way that she dressed and her outlook on her role as a woman, but also in terms of the types of things that she was writing of its period, it must have been quite challenging and daring. The next sketch for me was pretty exciting, Vita Sackville-West. I love the relationship between Vita and Virginia Woolf. There is something so beautiful about the way that they wrote to each other. I highly recommend that everybody reads the love letters between Vita Sackville-West and Virginia Woolf, because they are just so romantic and beautiful and endearing, and it just makes you wish that you had someone writing in that style to you and revealing their kind of profound hidden lust and love for that other person. There's just nothing like it in today's society in terms of receiving text messages and instant kind of dialogue that you get through your phone. Whereas these letters were so composed and beautiful, it just made me go completely gooey reading them. I do have a couple of quotes from those books. I am reduced to a thing that wants Virginia. I composed a beautiful letter to you in a sleepless nightmare hours of the night. It has all gone. I just miss you in a quiet, simple, desperate human way. like that is just like a tip of the iceberg in terms of the way that they kind of attack each other as well, and they're quite playful, but they're also quite snide, and it just like shows that there was this kind of love-hate element that went on through their relationship for quite some time, really. So Vita is the kind of focus starring role in one of Virginia Woolf's books called Orlando, which I actually have a copy of. And the interesting thing with Orlando is that it actually featured pictures of Orlando going through history. So in Orlando, the character goes from being male to female and has to cope with that kind of transition, just magically waking up. But some of the pictures in the actual book feature Vita Sackville as both male and female, and that was pretty horrifying for Lady Sackville-West, who actually wrote to the editor of The Observer saying, I don't want this book coming out, I don't want it like shaming my family, I've been trying to hide the secret for ages. And then she also apparently like went around the local shops trying to hide the book from like the public eye, which I could just like see Lady Sackville-West just kind of running around desperately trying to hide the scandal of her daughter. So it's worth me flicking over to the next one, which was Virginia Woolf, and just in terms of the relationship with Vita. I actually ended up doing this sketch when I actually was going home on the train, so it is a little bit more detailed just because I had a lot more time to actually be sat down and concentrate on her form, so it is a bit different probably to the other sketches which I did. I don't feel like I need to say too much about Virginia Woolf because she is so popular and well known. I have read Mrs. Dalloway. I particularly love this book. I also love how it was then kind of revisited by Michael Cunningham with his book The Hours, and I have done a full review on that one which I will link somewhere. This photograph though was actually done by Man Ray, which I thought was pretty damn cool for Virginia Woolf. The more that I find out about Virginia Woolf, the more I kind of get excited by her in her life and what she did. And it's really sad that she ended up committing suicide. Her legacy as a writer is just so incredibly rich and full, and she really did open up pathways for other writers, I think, of its time to come forward and be able to express themselves in a different way. She wasn't actually the first though, and I don't know who the first actually was, but like slightly before her was also Radcliffe Hall, and Virginia Woolf actually did testify in her court case. So this is Radcliffe Hall. Radcliffe Hall is like the Don. Like Radcliffe Hall kind of pushed the way forward for both men and women to write about same-sex relations. I think part of it's the fact that Radcliffe Hall was part of like the upper class, and so had a bit of wealth to kind of support herself on, but she wrote the book The Well of Loneliness, and this was actually like originally banned in the UK, but it came out in America, and then after a really positive reception it was finally like allowed to be released in the UK. Incredible tenacity to actually make that stand and say, I am here, I deserve to be accepted as a human being. The next person I wanted to talk about is Oscar Wilde. I ended up having to do quite a rushed, quick sketch of this one because it was coming close to the end of the day and I was really running out of time, so I just concentrated on his face. The actual painting was done by Robert Goodloe Harper. It was done in 1884. I don't know how well this is coming up on screen, but so here it's only like a tiny little image, but it was a full-length painting that was done, and I've not seen this painting before because I'm very familiar with this kind of photograph of Oscar Wilde and Lord Alfred Bruce Douglas, who was his kind of partner. So having this image of him as a younger man in this full-length way was really interesting for me. What they also had was the door to the prison of Oscar Wilde's cell. So when he was done for gross indecency and made bankrupt, he was put away for 2 years, and the Tate actually displayed this door, which in some ways is quite flamboyant as a cell door. You would it's not like just the traditional steel bars which you might imagine, but it did give you a sense of that kind of confined, claustrophobic, dingy cell which he would have had to live in for those 2 years. I've actually been to his grave over in Paris, and I've managed to give it a little kiss and everything, so I'm quite pleased and proud that I've been able to go and see him and visit him in that way. But I do have this book, which is the complete works of Oscar Wilde, and in terms of his fiction, I mean, I'm very familiar with A Picture of Dorian Gray, but he has done other works which include Lord Arthur Saville's Crime, The Happy Prince, and The Devoted Friend. Those are his other fiction titles, but I mean, he did loads. He's done critical dialogues, he's done plays, poems, and poems in prose. So he's just a bit of a genius. Last sketch which I managed to do, I know this was a proper rush job, and I don't feel like I got the proportions quite right. I got the angle wrong for sure, is Quentin Crisp. Now this is him in the book, Quentin Crisp, which was photographed by Angus MacBean in 1941. I think it's such a beautiful image of Quentin, because I've actually only seen other images as a much older man, so it's nice to actually see this more beautiful, younger, youthful version of him. But he's most famously known for writing The Naked Civil Servant. If you can't be asked to read it, I recommend that you search The Naked Civil Servant on YouTube. I will try and add a link in so you can see that film. He introduces it and he closes it, which is really great to see him. And there is also his follow-up film, which was An Alien in New York. And so to see his life story and what he was confronted with and dealing with during those quite different periods were really incredible. And he was unapologetic about his sexual identity and the way in which he looked. He enjoyed wearing makeup and he dyed his hair, even though he knew that he could be imprisoned for his behaviours. I have done a previous hauling video about this. I've still not got around to reading it, but this is Love Made Easy, which is a fictional novel, and what I am super proud and excited of in terms of owning this piece is that it's actually signed by Quentin Crisp himself. So for me, this is super cool and impressive to have this little bit of history and a part of Quentin Crisp himself in my life. Anyway, those are my sketches of Tate Britain in terms of the work which I saw and reviewed for queer British art between 1861 and 1967. Those are the queer fictional writers which I picked out from their exhibition. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon. Okay, bye!